The next block for the 2023 block of the month is this one, and it will be set like this. This is the Martha Washington Star, Dewey Star, Queen Victoria, something like that. And I have a video that will help you in making this one. There's also in the pattern is one that's similar. Well, it has the exact same pieces, it's just colored a little bit differently. And so this one, I think I called it pinwheel star with pinwheel, something like that. But both of these patterns are on one page for February, and I have a video which I'm going to show you right now of how I make this first one. Okay, this is one more bit about doing that 1/4 inch seam. I think you might be able to see it better with this example. Here are 2 triangles I'm sewing together, and I'm lining up this edge of my foot. Also on my throat plate, I have a little tiny little mark here, and that's usually what I go by. I make sure that my fabric is just close but not covering that little mark, and that way I can make sure that I am doing a 1/4 inch. And then I'm going to put another piece right in there, and I'm going to line him up so that he's just next to this little mark. That little mark is really where I'm mostly watching and trying to make sure what's coming through is going to come right there. Be careful as you flip as you roll your fabric through that you don't let it get pulled to one side or the other. Okay, I have sewn 4 triangle pairs, and I was very careful to make a 1/4 inch seam there, and then I just finger press them to the color side. You can finger press them open if you like, but I thought for this I would just finger press them. These are sort of one of the things that I like to finger press inside rather than take it to an ironing board, and sometimes that can pull edges. Some of these edges are going to be on the bias. So then I am going to sew them each pair. I'm going to sew to another triangle right here. And so what I usually do in order to make sure that they're nice and accurate is I lay them together and I put 1 pin at the middle, and I make sure that each corner is fine and together. And now I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and sew a 1/4 inch right along there. Okay, now I'm at the sewing machine, and you might notice back here I have what's called a leader or ender or scrap or whatever. But this piece is the piece that I put in after I finished sewing the 4 pairs together. And so my needle is down. I am going to sew until I get some space there. I'm going to lift up my needle and set my piece in so that this tiny mark right here is showing, and my piece is heading in, and it's going to be heading in at the 1/4 inch line. I don't usually use this pokey thing when I'm sewing, but it might help you see better if I use that. As I get close to my pin, I'm going to pull the pin out and use either my finger or something to make sure that my seam is still lined up right next to that mark. Now I can feed the next one in just the same way, going slowly and carefully so that my sewing doesn't get off to one side. Okay, this is the way that these little pieces need to go together. I've sewn them together, and then this time I went and pressed this seam. But notice these little triangles hanging out on the edge. Those are called dog ears. Those are not very helpful when you're trying to sew this together. But before I cut them off, I took them and laid them on my mat and made sure that they measured 2 3/4 inches from edge to edge, a 2 3/4 inch square. And I know that's what it needs to be because it's a half of 4 1/2, which would be 2 1/4. So anyway, that's what we need to make sure. Since I've measured mine already, they are fine. They are the right size. And I could take my rotary cutter and just cut them off. But sometimes it's just easier to snip them off with my scissors. And these are... After you have the corners clipped, then we have our 4 squares that we're going to put together. And it doesn't matter how long you've been sewing or quilting. Some of us still need to lay things out the exact way it is in the picture and make sure that everything is laying just like our pattern shows. I still have to do that, and I've been quilting a long, long time. So now they're all laid out and they're ready to sew. I'm going to take this one, flip him over, and it's a lucky thing, but notice how this seam is going this way. On the other side, it's going this way. That makes it easier for us to sew this together. So I'm going to put a pin right here. And I may put a pin up here, although sometimes I can just feed this into the sewing machine without using a pin at the top. I'm going to make a 1/4 inch seam right down here. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this piece. And then we'll sew the 2 together. I have sewn these 2 together, and these 2 together. And this time I decided I would press them open on the back. You could press them to opposing sides, that works. And sometimes I do that, but this time I decided I would press them open. And then I can lay these 2 together. And I am looking to see where these 1/4 inch will come down. And I put a pin right about here and see if it comes in. It looks like it came pretty close. And if you're really particular, you can put a pin in the middle and then put 1 on each side. Sometimes I do that. Other times, you know, if I'm just sewing along, I'm thinking if anybody really is going to worry about every little thing, maybe I'm not. But then I will put a pin on the outer edges too, so that I can sew along and not have anything. And now I will take it a little slower when I am sewing right around the center part. Now, I am going to try to sew this 4-block section together, and we'll see how it goes. Notice I have this piece sticking in there. That kind of keeps me from having to worry about my threads. Notice how slow I'm going. I'm watching this little line right here. As I take a pin out, often I use that pin to sort of lay things nice and straight down on the base of the machine. See how this flipped up? I will often take my foot, pick it up to get that to lay down. And now I'm getting close to a pin. So I'm going to watch very carefully because I don't want to sew through a pin. That's not good. But I want to make sure and do a 1/4 inch. So I took that pin out. The other pin's still here. Let's take him out and let's move right through. And I'm not going to guarantee that this is perfect. But if it's close enough so that I'm happy with it, that's fine. almost done. And I wanted to show you that a lot of sewing carefully is not just in using the sewing machine, it's also before you use the sewing machine and how you lay things out. For my block, I need to have 4 geese shapes on each side. So I lay them out on my cutting mat be right next to my machine. This helps me make sure that I don't end up with anything in the wrong spot. Then there are 4 corner squares which need to be laid out. Once I get these laid out, and I'm sure everybody's facing the right way and it all looks fine, looks like it's going to match, then I will take them and I will sew this to this to this. So I have 1 row done, this to this to this, two rows done, and then the bottom row, and then sew the rows together. So don't feel like you're being too simple if you have to lay things out in front of you, but it sure helps to keep from having to tear out the seams later on. It's just part of the sewing that some of us need to have everything laid out just like we need it before we start to sew. Okay, one more thing about sewing accurately. Sewing accurately is helped by the way that you press your seams. I have now made 3 rows for this block, and this row, the top row, I have pressed out. That seemed to be the way it wanted to go. This big center row I pressed in. Oftentimes I will press all of the rows open, but on this time it seemed to be they wanted to go this way, so I'm not going to fight with them. These guys are going out too, so we have out, in, out. Now when I put these together and line up the seams, they are opposing seams, so it's easier to put the pins in. Here is the piece again. I've put a pin right in this seam, and on these I could just usually put a pin on the right side of the seam, and then I'll probably stick one in the middle so that I have the middle matching up to that middle seam on the other piece, and then one on each end. So pinning is helpful with your sewing, as well as the way the seams are pressed. And oftentimes when I'm working on a block, I'm pressing inside. I will not use an iron, I will just finger press. But I think on this one, I decided an iron was necessary. Ready to sew. Okay, I need to go press it, but it looks pretty good. I will press it and then I'm almost done.